Thank you so much, hosts and partners in this. So we're going to go ahead and turn to the second part of our agenda this morning, which is framing the conversation. Myself and Vince Bonham, who we've been working very closely with, will go ahead and offer some comments just to help continue to set the stage before we turn to our first panel. So I'm just going to offer a few reflections. Again, I want to acknowledge the Piscataway Conoy people here and the beautiful location that we're at. To have this conversation at the National Museum of the American Indian is pretty significant and special. We really want to thank our partners and the folks at NHGRI who have made this possible. We've been planning for many months and almost years, it seems, as part of our partnership on the American Indian Alaska Native Genetic Resource Guide, which is available online at genetics.ncai.org. As you heard this morning, Native scholars, community members, and our science partners were very active in helping us create that resource as a tool. We as NCI don't take a position on genetics research, but our role is to help support tribal leaders in the decisions that they make and in supporting the exercise of tribal sovereignty. So that is really what our function is and what our hope is for our conversation today. Again, I want to acknowledge that we are being live streamed and that we have video recording going on so that this forum can be a conversation resource for communities going forward who may not be able to join us here in Washington, D.C. today. As you heard from my director, Jackie Peda, I was not the director when this partnership started at the Policy Research Center, so it's been a bit of a learning curve for me. I'm an educationalist by training, not so much a scientist, but it has been a really profound journey through this. I will tell you, though, that I have personally struggled with this topic, not so much because I don't see the power of science. Our Policy Research Center is designed because we believe in the power of research and science to assist tribes in the decision-making that they go through and in exercising their tribal sovereignty. I struggled with it not because I don't see the potential of genetic technology. I have traveled this country, Indian country, heard from individuals, from families, from communities about their decisions to invest and to participate in genetics research because of their beliefs in the technology that can offer their communities in terms of health and wellness and understanding how to leverage science in different ways. The reason that I struggled and continue to struggle is because I worry about whose interests are being considered in decision-making about genetic science and who is holding those decision makers accountable for the impact of those decisions. There are and there have been collateral damages when it comes to science operating in ways that are outside of the bounds or outside of the accountability of communities and without discourse about how ethics need to be reconsidered over and over again. Ethics is not a one moment in time experience where you get your institutional review board approval and you move forward. But we know in this work that it's a daily engagement with new questions, with new technologies, with new information about the impacts that science can have in this context. At the same time that I struggle with whether or not to engage with or to participate in genetics research as an individual, I am clear that this is our work as the NCI Policy Research Center. Our work is to be a forum. That's why we have this title, Spectrum of Perspectives, acknowledging that there's not one perspective in Indian country. We are 566 federally recognized tribes, state-recognized tribes, the range of indigenous people and communities across. And part of our role is to create the space to have difficult conversations, to understand where we do connect, where we do see alike perspectives, and where we differ, and why those differences are there, and how we can move as a community with those similarities and differences there. When I first considered, or first applied, I should say, for this job, I did some research about the executive directors and the founders of the National Congress of American Indians to try to understand the organization that I was hoping to join. And I found some words that one of our former executive directors, someone some of you may have heard of, Vine Deloria Jr., a very well-known philosopher, wrote about NCI during his time as the executive director. And he said that if the NCI doesn't serve as a forum for the Indian peoples, it has no purpose. And so really taking on that notion of creating the space and really thinking about what our mission is as the Policy Research Center, which is to provide tribal leaders with the best knowledge and information to inform their decision-making within a framework of Native wisdom to ensure the best futures for our peoples. So everything that we do, every partnership that we enter into is to provide that knowledge and information, but really through that Native wisdom cultural lens. And that's what I'm going to encourage you to listen for today, is to think about some of the narratives that you're hearing on this stage about how culture matters, but also the interplay between culture and science. There are a lot of narratives out there that suggest that as Indigenous people with Indigenous culture, we are non-scientific, right? Framing our cultures as being traditional, non-technical. That is not the case. As an Alaska Native person with family from the islands of Kodiak and Afognak in Alaska and Oahu and Lanai in Hawaii, I can tell you that my family, my ancestors, have deep science, the ability to survive and to thrive in extreme climates and to persist. We engage regularly with science. In the same way, science is often held up as being acultural, as being not a part of anyone's, as being objective, as being unbiased. But as those of us who work within science know, somebody's culture is always at work. It may not be ours, but there is certainly a cultural bent when it comes to science. So, unfortunately, I think culture and science are often put at polar ends of a spectrum. Spectrums we're here to talk about today. But I really encourage you to think about what your perspective is about the relationship between culture and science and how that connects to some of the perspectives that you're going to hear today. And on that note, I want to share, we were really saddened to know that one of our invitees wasn't able to join us, but I want to bring her in the room. She's one of the leading scholars on the topic that we're here to discuss. Her name is Kim Tallbear. Dr. Kim Tallbear is a Dakota scholar, and she wrote a new book called Native American DNA, Tribal Belonging and the False Promise of Genetic Science. As you can tell, she has a pretty particular perspective from the title here. But she talks in some of her later chapters about a project called the Genographic Project, which is a privately funded effort by National Geographic, IBM, and the Waite Family Foundation, that's picking up some of where the Human Genome Diversity Project left off. But she talks a lot about the different narratives that are out there related to genetics and the links between culture and science. She talks about the idea that science can tell you about who you are, some of our, where we come from, this idea that we in some ways are all descendant from Africa is how she talks about it, and she takes issue with some of that framing. But that's a question. Do you believe that the value of science is to tell you about who you are and where we come from as a human race? That's a question. Thinking about your perspective on that front. Some Indigenous scholars and communities that I've spoken with have said, well, we have our origin stories, and we need to consider how what we're learning from science actually strengthens or challenges some of that. So you'll hear some of that narrative today, and so I really want to encourage you to listen to that. She also talks about narratives from genetic science, genomic science, related to the fact that we are members of nuclear families, which emphasizes matrilineal and patrilineal relationship. And she says, this is important, looking at where we come from in terms of our matrilines and patrilines, but she also is concerned that when used alone, they entail distinctly non-tribal or group ways of reckoning relations and self. She suggests they do not illuminate crucial histories, community entanglements, or governance, as those things unfold within the time frame of Indigenous memory. This narrative she's talking about, we are all related, that's coming out of genetic science and genomic science, is also inadequate to understanding how Indigenous peoples reckon relationships in more complicated ways, both biologically and culturally at group levels. And it's this emphasis on group that I think is important at some level, and we keep coming against it, or coming up towards it rather, in our understandings of ethics. A lot of the ethical frame that undergirds science in this country is based around an individualism, thinking about individual consent to participate in research, respect for persons is how it's often referred to, beneficence and justice. These are the principles that sit under our ethical guidelines here in the U.S. and also globally to some extent. But what we hear back from tribal leaders is that unfortunately these ethics don't often account for group level concerns. It's not so much that group trumps individual, which is often how Indigenous knowledge is framed, but it's that Indigenous cultures help us understand the interdependence between the individual and the collective. And that's what I hope you listen to as well today in thinking about the relationship between culture and science. Where is the group's voice? Where is the collective? Where is the interdependence between individual decision-making and group decision-making? And is there a way for us to find a happy medium on that level there? So she talks a lot about governance in her book, and in her final concluding chapter, just want to read one more quote from Dr. Tallbear. She says, "The most promising strategies for change in genome research practices are not those that are free of state authority, but rather those that combine the pragmatic advantages of tribal and indigenous regulation with efforts to transform our philosophical and ethical landscapes." So she and other scholars are calling on us as Indigenous people, as Indigenous communities, to hold up governance in the conversations about genetics research and genomic science in this conversation, because she believes that there is value to be added in talking about the relationship between research regulation and ethics, how we think about the decision-making and the impact of our decisions that way. At the same time we hold up culture and governance with our science partners, we will hear questions raised today about how we as communities of Indigenous people are engaging with new technologies. And I encourage those of you in the audience, those of you watching, and those watching the recording, to think and to discuss the question, what does that look like in your tribe or nation? What does it mean to engage with new technologies? How are we being guided? What are those anchor points that are guiding us and thinking about how to do that in a good way? I know in my own community, we're looking at new word councils, for example. The fact that our languages are growing, our cultures are dynamic, they're not fixed. They're always needing to grow and change. So how do we develop new words in our languages for new experiences, new terms that come up? Social media for citizen engagement. A lot of tribes and nations are looking at how to engage their citizens through social media, through elections, through different ways. We've got hashtags here for this event, and we encourage you to tweet and to share with people who can't be with us in the room today. There's also the use of electronic health records as another example for how to promote the health and wellness of communities through the use of technology. But these conversations about how to do that in a good and a right way need to be ongoing, and that's a part of what we're here to do. I had an elder who passed a few years ago, Angayukak Oscar Coagli, one of the most well-known and just most influential Yupik scholars, who would often talk to us about his excitement about new technologies, particularly virtual technologies of communication. But he would often warn us and say, Malia, you know, these are really important to engage with, but don't ever let them replace the face-to-face engagement. And what that reminds me of and constantly keeps me centered around is the importance of place and the importance of our connection to land. And whenever I have really difficult moments in this work and am not sure what the next step is, I feel like I've got Vine and Oscar sitting on each shoulder saying to me, remember the land, find the connection to land, and you will find your course in this, whether it be the Baby Veronica case or the Bay Mills case that were recently decided in the courts, thinking about some of the experiences and the complexities that come up with some of these policy issues. If you find the land, if you trace the land, you will be able to find out, is what I'm hearing, whether these policies help to strengthen or threaten our ability to live as Native peoples. And so I encourage you in the same moment to listen for the discourse about the relationship between culture and science today, to really look for the land and think about your perspectives on whether these technologies and sciences are being designed in a way that helps to strengthen our relationships to each other as people of places. So to conclude, really, this is about hearing from you. We really want to encourage you after the panels. There will be a microphone set up in the back for you as audience members to raise questions, to give us some of your perspectives. And we encourage you to do that going forward. We as NCI need to hear what your perspectives are. We want to engage in the discourse and dialogue because that's how we inform our policy agenda as representing the perspectives of tribal nations and Indian people. That is our work, to inform the best futures of our people. And so I look forward to hearing from you today, to learning with you today, and to thinking with you over time about how we continue to return over and over again to this conversation here. So thank you for sharing some of that time with me.